Good morning. My name is Gunnery Sergeant Cox, and I'm going to be giving you your next lesson on the weapons loader fuel system. Okay, so previously we talked about the lifting system, which is the muscles of the unit. Now we're going to talk about the blood of the unit, which is the fuel system. And after this lesson, we're going to talk about the brains of the unit, which is the electrical system. So after this course, you're going to have a good understanding of how each subsystem works together as a team to drive the unit and make it work properly. A little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Gunnery Sergeant Cox. I've been in the Marine Corps for 14 years. Of those 14 years, I spent 9 years in the Work Center 920, which is the hydraulics work center. So that deals with cylinders, and deals with different kind of pumps, everything like that that's incorporated into the SAT floater, I've basically done. So I've changed every pump, every engine on the SAT floater. I've rewired the entire system, changed every cylinder. So I'm confident I'm able to give you all effective instruction when it comes to the weapons loader. By show of hands, how many of us have worked on any type of fuel system before, whether that be on a jet ski, a lawnmower, anything along those lines? Okay, good. Some of us. For those of you that haven't, I'm confident that after this class, you're going to know the different components that make up a fuel system and how they drive a fuel system to feed fuel to the unit. Okay, let's talk about classroom expectations. While you're in this class, you're welcome to have any kind of food or drink. I just ask that you have a screw-on type lid so that you don't spill fuel all over the computers, as well as pick up any trash that you might have at the end of class so we can leave this classroom better than how we found it. Also, I ask that everybody takes notes and does their absolute best. You do need a 70% to pass this class. However, we are all Marines in here, and we all have that competitive edge. So we all want to do our absolute best and get that number 1. If you do have the highest GPA at the end of this class, you'll be given a letter of academic achievement that you can take to your next duty station, put in the system, put you one step closer to promotion. Last, but certainly not least, let's talk about safety. This weapons loader deals with a bunch of different types of hazmat. So we want to refer to the material safety data sheet and wear any type of proper protective equipment that it says to make sure we're operating in the safest condition possible. Also, there's a ton of different pinch points on this unit, so we want to make sure that we're maintaining situational awareness and keeping our hands and toes away from any type of pinch points so that we can keep all our digits throughout the class. Do we have any questions about expectations or what we're going to cover before we move on to the enabling objectives? If there's no questions, let's talk about what we're going to learn about today. Okay, so today we're going to identify by selecting correct statements concerning the major components, purposes, characteristics of the A/S 32 Kilo TAC 1 Echo weapons loader fuel system. To put that in layman's terms, we're going to talk about each component and what it does. Questions about what we're going to cover before we move on to the meat and potatoes of the class? If there's no questions, let's go ahead and get this party started. All right, I'd like to start everyone off with a little sea story. Basically, when I was in Yuma, Arizona, I was a Lance Corporal at the time, and one of the squadrons brought back a weapons loader telling us that it won't start. So my sergeant said, "Lance Corporal, go ahead and troubleshoot that unit and see what happens." First thing that I did was I obviously looked in the fuel tank to see if it was out of fuel. So I screwed off the fuel cap, looked in there, and I could see some weird like white residue / green stuff floating around in the fuel, and I thought, that's weird. I need to drain the fuel tank. So I went ahead and drained the fuel tank, and pieces of lettuce and tomato and like soggy bread started coming out of the fuel tank. And I thought to myself, that's not supposed to be in there. Well, it turns out one of the squadron representatives, they skipped chow, and they decided they were going to get hungry while they were working on the flight line. For those of you that don't know, you're not supposed to have any kind of food on the flight line because there's all kind of hazardous materials. It's a thought hazard, things along those lines. And I guess someone of importance started walking up to him, and instead of like putting it in his coveralls or just taking responsibility for it, he went ahead and shoved it into the fuel tank of the weapons loader, which obviously clogged the system up. So long story short, don't eat any Subway sandwiches while you're on a staff loader. Okay, so let's talk about the major components of the fuel system. First thing we have is the fuel tank. Obviously, that's where fuel starts. That's where fuel is stored. It's a 6-gallon capacity, and it provides real-time fuel on demand to the fuel system when the operator is asking for it. After the fuel tank, there's a primary fuel filter that's incorporated at the bottom of the fuel tank. Basically, it's a fuel strainer. If you think of like a salad colander or something along those lines, where you have the salad strainer, you put the salad, catch all those big particulates and all that dirt, and it's going to allow the clean fuel to flow through. After the primary fuel filter, you have the fuel transfer pump. The fuel transfer pump is what provides the muscles of the fuel system. That's what's going to pull the fuel from the fuel tank, and it's going to send it all the way forward to the injection pump, which is a component that we're going to cover here in a little bit. The fuel transfer pump actually works in sync with the camshaft. It's connected to the camshaft. So if we think of what we learned in Pensacola, a camshaft is a rod with like the little egg lobes on it, and it spins with the flywheel, right? Well, if that's connected to the fuel transfer pump, on the upstroke of the camshaft, it's going to open that pump. On the downstroke, it's going to close it. When the pump opens, that means it's going to pull fuel from the fuel tank, and when it closes, it pushes fuel forward to the rest of the system. Does that make sense? Good. The fuel transfer pump then pushes fuel to the secondary fuel filter. The secondary fuel filter is exactly how it sounds. It's a secondary fuel filter. It's going to clean out that smaller particulates. And it's a screw-on type cartridge. So if you think of like an oil filter or something along those lines, it's the same concept. It's changed out at different intervals, different maintenance intervals, which is 182 days. It's a screw-on type cartridge. When you take it off, you put fuel in the new one, you screw the new one on, and you only want to screw it on hand tight. Why do we think we only want to screw that secondary fuel filter on hand tight? PFC Marshall.
Gunnery Sergeant, I believe, would strip the threads on the thing you screw into and for proper pressurization.
Outstanding answer. We don't want to damage the filter, and we don't want to damage the housing that the filter mounts onto. So if you screw it on there as hard as you could damage it, or you could just make it difficult for the next maintainer that comes to change that out, take it off. Because that filter is exposed to different elements, it could get some mild corrosion, which would have it adhere to the housing, and it's just all bad. So we want to make sure we want to screw it on hand tight and make sure that there's no leaks and leave it like that. Okay, after the secondary fuel filter, fuel then goes to the injection pump. The injection pump is what takes over sending the fuel forward through the fuel system. So the injection pump is also working in line with the camshaft. So everything works in sync with the spinning of that camshaft. On the upstroke, it's going to open. On the downstroke, it's going to send fuel forward. The thing about the injection pump that's different than the fuel transfer pump is the injection pump is what meters the fuel. That's what sends the perfect amount of fuel forward to the injection nozzle. This is how we're going to make sure that the system doesn't flood or doesn't get enough fuel or anything along those lines. That injection pump is what provides that perfect amount of fuel to the injection nozzles. And the last major component before the engine is the injection nozzles. The injection nozzles are there to provide a fine spray of fuel to the cylinder. Why do we think a fine spray of fuel is important? Lance Corporal's aware.
It'll promote good combustion for the system.
Perfect. Okay, so they have spark plugs, right? So we need to make sure that that fuel is distributed perfectly throughout the cylinder. So on the upstroke of the ram, it's going to provide that distributed pressure, and it's going to promote good combustion. Okay, do we have any questions on the major components of the fuel system before we talk about how they work together as a team? All right, if there's no questions, let's go ahead and talk about system operation. We're going to talk about system operation with the use of my handy-dandy diagram that I designed right here. Okay, so fuel starts at the fuel tank. The fuel transfer pump is what's going to pull that fuel from the fuel tank into the primary fuel filter. It is then going to go into the fuel transfer pump. On that downstroke of the camshaft, the fuel transfer pump is going to send that fuel forward through the secondary fuel filter, which is going to filter out that smaller particulate sediment, and it's going to send it to the injection pump. The injection pump is going to take over from there and provide that metered fuel to the injection nozzles. That's also going to work off the camshaft as well. The injection nozzles is the last major component, and those open and close at a predetermined pressure. So the cool thing about the injection nozzles is they are pressurized by the injection pump, and once they reach a certain pressure, they're going to open and disperse that fine spray of fuel to this cylinder. As they're dispersing that fine spray of fuel, that pressure is dropping. Once it reaches a low pressure, they're going to close back up and be repressurized. And so the process is just going to keep repeating itself, and that's how it is self-sustaining. Last but not least, inside the engine, not all the fuel actually combusts all during those upstrokes of the cylinders. So if that fuel doesn't combust, it could get stuck in those cylinders and flood the engine. So if it doesn't have anywhere to go, it'll flood. That's basically what this line is right here. That's a return line that sends the fuel back to the fuel tank. So the fuel that doesn't combust during that process, it gets sent back, recycled to the fuel tank, and gets sent back through the fuel system to try again. Do we have any questions about system operation before we move on to the summary and review? Okay, if there's no questions, let's go ahead and move on to the summary and review. Okay, so today we identified correct statements concerning the major components, purposes, characteristics of the weapons loader fuel system, and we also selected correct statements concerning operation of the diesel engine fuel system. Do you have any questions about what we covered today? Okay, if there's no questions, I have some questions for you. Where does fuel go after the primary fuel filter? PFC Prentice.
The fuel transfer pump, Gunnery Sergeant?
Home run. So the fuel transfer pump is what pulls that fuel from the fuel tank and sends it forward to the rest of the system. What drives the injection pump? Lance Corporal Johnson.
That would be the camshaft, Gunnery Sergeant.
Outstanding. So that camshaft is the rod with the little egg-shaped lobes on it, and that's going to be spinning, and both the fuel transfer pump and the injection pump work off of that as a team. Okay, last question. Which filter filters out the smaller particulate sediment? PFC Marshall.
That would be the secondary fuel filter, Gunnery Sergeant.
Touchdown. That secondary fuel filter is that screw-on type cartridge, and we want to make sure we're only screwing that on hand tight so that we're not damaging the filter or the housing. Okay, now that you all have sat through this class, I'm confident that you all have a great understanding of the weapons loader fuel system, each component, and how they work together to provide fuel to the system. Again, most important, we want to make sure that we emphasize safety. So this system deals with a lot of different types of hazardous materials, so we want to make sure we are referring to the material safety data sheet and utilizing all proper protective equipment that it states. Also, there's a lot of different pinch points associated with this unit, so we want to make sure that we're maintaining situational awareness and we're keeping our hands away from any type of pinch point. My name is Gunnery Sergeant Cox. This concludes my lesson on the weapons loader fuel system.